They live together. They love together. They kill together. In 1987, the Toronto suburb of Scarboro was under attack. A serial rapist was preying on teenage girls.
Women, when they were riding the bus home late at night, at the time, the bus driver would only stop at the bus stop. It was very easy to see who was on the bus, whether male or female, and you could position yourself. You could see that the bus was slowing down, so he could just run down the street, hide behind some houses, and just follow her. And, you know, if she went a long distance or down a dark street, he attacked her.
In just 1 month, 2 girls were brutally raped and tortured.
In addition to the sexual assault itself, it was a physical trauma associated with the sexual assault. He was profane toward the victims. He used degrading and demeaning terms such as bitch, whore, slut, that type of thing. In some instances, he even forced the victims to degrade themselves.
The Metropolitan Toronto Police had little to go on. None of the victims had seen their attacker's face.
He told me that if I didn't stop screaming.
Police set up surveillance in the area and doubled their patrols. When details of the rapes were published, the town was gripped with fear.
They were warning the public about it, and everybody was quite aware in the Toronto area about this Scarboro rapist so that they could, protect themselves from it.
Investigators set up a hotline, and hundreds of tip-offs came in. But still, there were no solid leads.
Scarboro was kind of an upper-class, stable, upper-class neighborhood. No one thought anyone there would be capable of such horrific crimes.
It was a real concern, and there was a huge task force assigned to it, and the police held, like, town hall meetings.
And they were warning women about that there seemed to be a predator in the area.
"23-year-old Paul Bernardo was a junior accountant living in Scarboro.
He had a lot of charm. He knew how to sweet-talk people.
But Bernardo had a dark side.
Paul Bernardo is a psychopathic, narcissistic, sexual sadist. It is not the infliction of pain that's arousing to the sexual sadist. It's the suffering of a victim. It can be either psychological suffering or physical suffering. Psychopathic, indicating he can change his personality to adapt to the environment he finds himself in. He's very manipulative, chronic liar, narcissistic. By that I mean he is very self-centered. He considers himself to be the center of the universe. Everyone exists for his pleasure.
He eluded police while he continued preying on the young girls of Scarboro.
Paul Bernardo was fixated on virgin girls. And I think the reason for that is really very simple to explain. Paul Bernardo was very much into power. He enjoyed power. And part of the power that I think he enjoyed was his fantasy of deflowering them, taking away something that they possessed.
And Bernardo went on indulging his fantasies for years. In 1987, a serial rapist was on the loose in suburban Toronto. Authorities didn't know it then, but the crimes were being committed by 23-year-old Paul Bernardo. But he wasn't always successful. In July, one girl resisted his attack. He beat her before running off.
He had no guilt, no remorse, and no empathy, yet he could be very charming and a likable guy to be around, which masked all of these very, very deadly tendencies that were lurking beneath the surface.
Bernardo was a master at hiding his violent secret. To the outside world, he appeared to be an all-Canadian boy. On the 17th of October, 1987, Paul Bernardo met 17-year-old Karla Homolka.
She was coming to a convention in Scarboro, animal convention. She worked in a veterinarian shop, and Bernardo just happened to be there with a friend. And the two of them saw Karla and her friends there, and they, Paul, being the attractive charmer, just sort of moved right in. She is a very attractive person, nice figure, and she was totally enthralled with him and would do anything he wanted.
When a sexual sadist wants to develop a person who's willing to participate in the behaviors he desires, he goes through 5 specific steps. Step number 1 is to identify the vulnerable person.
He saw in her somebody that he could control, and they eventually ended up in a hotel room. Had sex that night.
I think when this all started, when she started her relationship with Paul Bernardo, she was a small town girl. She was 17 or 18, but she was no naif. But she was not savvy to the ways of the world. You know, the sex came first. They were in lust, not necessarily in love.
It was difficult to get a handle on her. I mean, on one hand, she was a very strong-willed person, and it was hard to understand why a person that was strong-willed and very intelligent, by the way, have a very high IQ, why a person like that would not see the danger.
Karla Homolka was living with her parents, 60 kilometers southeast of Toronto, in the small town of St. Catharines, near Niagara Falls.
He started seeing her, he started driving out to St. Catharines after that and staying with her, and while he was still living in Toronto. She had a very good family. The family was, everybody in the neighborhood liked going there. They had a swimming pool in the backyard. The father and mother were very sociable people.
To Karla, Paul seemed the perfect man.
She was a small town girl who wanted to get the heck out of St. Catharines, and Paul Bernardo, big Toronto boy, and it was almost, you know, he came into her life and kind of swooped her away, and she was in high school at the time, and he drove up in his big fancy car and pressed the hell out of everybody. Well, they're high school kids, and so she fell in for that.
It wasn't long before she also fell under his spell.
Step number 2 is seduction. He uses the same techniques that you or I would use with the opposite sex to seduce them into a sexual relationship. He's attentive, he gives gifts, he's spontaneous. Over a period of time, the victim falls in love with him. Step number 3 is to reshape her sexual norms. He begins introducing sexual activities into their sexual play that she's never participated in before.
As Paul and Karla grew closer, the brutal attacks in Scarboro continued. By November of 1988, the rape count had reached 7.
He said it wasn't the same. Consensual sex just wasn't the same. It wasn't exciting, and it wasn't as satisfying as a rape was. He has a tremendous amount of anger toward women. Where did that anger emanate from? Was it his mother? Was it a babysitter? Was it a girlfriend? What? We don't know the answer to that.
He found out about age 15 or 16 that who he thought was his father wasn't his father, and somebody else was his father, and so this was a very volatile, tumultuous kind of environment that he was raised in.
A few months later, in Scarboro, Bernardo attacked his 11th victim. Finally, investigators got a break.
One of the women was able to identify him. A composite sketch was done, and the likeness to Bernardo was absolutely incredible.
Authorities released the sketch 2 days later.
Police did a huge media blitz. It was in all the papers. It was on billboards everywhere.
Thousands of tip-offs came in. Over the next 6 months, investigators questioned 300 men, including Paul Bernardo.
Bank teller was suspicious when she saw him come to the bank, and she looked at the sketch. All his friends felt the same way, and they all teased him about it, and he just kind of laughed it off.
Scarborough police interviewed Bernardo on the 20th of November.
Even though he looked bang on, looked like your central casting villain, and the police interviewed him. They took a DNA sample. They were very suspicious, but they had other suspects.
He gave voluntarily up his sample for DNA. And as you know, that anybody that would refuse the DNA, then you might be a little more suspect of that man, whether he has reasons to or not. In this case, he volunteered it and gave it up without any kind of problems. So that, I think, caused maybe a little less alarm towards him.
Police released Bernardo and added his sample to the 300 others. Then began the slow process of testing them.
DNA testing at the time was not as sophisticated as it is today, and not as quick.
Although the police had hundreds of suspects, the investigation slowed to a crawl.
It was a real concern. Then the attacks just mysteriously stopped. The task force dissolved, and Paul Bernardo just walked away.
In the autumn, Paul moved in with Karla and her family in St. Catharines. He even told Karla that he'd been questioned by the police.
He could hint at it and see what her reaction would be. He could tell her that he is a rapist to see what her reaction would be. So he's holding that in reserve to be used at a later date.
A few months later, police in St. Catharines were called to investigate a rape. She was Bernardo's next victim, a 14-year-old girl who'd been grabbed off the street in broad daylight.
He took greater risks not because he was not paying attention, but because he considered himself to be all-powerful. And the longer he was able to get away with his crimes, the more convinced he became that he was omnipotent.
After living with the Homolkas for several months, Paul...
This was the big city boy from Toronto, and Paul was very charming with her, and Paul eventually, because he liked sex with younger girls, liked to assault younger girls, told Karla that he wanted to have sex with her sister.
As to why Paul Bernardo would want Tammy, the younger sister of Karla, she represents virgin. She represents unspoiled youth. She's also a further test. How far is Karla willing to go to appease him, to please him?
He wanted Karla to help him rape Tammy.
Karla worked in an animal clinic, and she had access to drugs. She was the one who brought the drug home.
Karla used a combination of sedatives.
plan was to spike her drink, and she would pass out, and Paul would have his way with her. He would videotape the whole thing, and then they'd put her back in bed. That's when she should have dumped him. She could have said to him, "What are you talking about? You want to rape my sister? Are you nuts? Like, what are you, a maniac?"
On the 23rd of December, 1990, Paul and Karla put their plan in motion.
They were all drinking that night, and the parents went to bed, and nobody had any reason to be suspicious.
Karla served Tammy several alcoholic drinks laced with sleeping pills. She soaked a cloth with an anesthetic to ensure Tammy wouldn't wake up.
Are you filming? Yeah. Okay. Two lovely sisters.
She had the chance to stop this whole thing. You know, and she should have just, and she didn't. She said, "Okay, let's go along with this plan."
They took turns raping Tammy. Then suddenly, she started to choke.
And then the poor girl, when she started to come out of this, because she had drunk all this booze and mixed drinks and so forth, vomited and aspirated her stomach contents into her lungs.
Karla and Paul rang for help.
And the investigating officers who attended at 911 treated it as just another teenager who had had too much to drink and had vomited and aspirated, and they didn't think much more about it.
Tammy died at the hospital 3 hours later.
Paul kind of freaked out. He was crying. When the police came, he was emotionally upset. He was very disturbed. I don't think he wanted to see her die, but he put on a good show. And, you know, he didn't seem like a suspect.
Investigators didn't suspect foul play. The medical examiner determined that Tammy had choked on her own vomit after drinking too much alcohol. On the 27th of December, 1990, Tammy Lynn Homolka was laid to rest. Paul blamed Karla for her death.
Paul felt that because she worked in the animal clinic that she should have known better. She should have somehow controlled the quantity of drugs that they gave Tammy Lynn.
Eager to win back Paul's affections, Karla was willing to do anything to make up for her fatal mistake. She even watched the video of Tammy's rape and dressed up in Tammy's clothing.
They had this awful secret that only they knew. They knew the truth to this, and that was a bond that kept them together.
Distraught over the death of their youngest daughter, the Homolkas asked Bernardo to move out so they could grieve in private. Paul continued with the next step of his plan. He and Karla moved to Port Dalhousie, 7 kilometers from St. Catharines.
Step number 4 is to socially isolate her. He doesn't want her talking to her friends and family members about what's going on.
In the winter of 1991, Paul and Karla began planning a large summer wedding.
She wanted her big wedding, even though her parents were still grieving the loss of her sister.
But their impending nuptials didn't curb Paul's increasing sexual appetite.
He always talked about wanting to bring somebody home so that when he had sex with them, I should probably more accurately say that when he raped them over and over, he could do it at his leisure. And he told her that, and she said, you know, she didn't object.
The motivation is affection and attention. She knows that as long as she is compliant, she's going to receive that attention and affection that is so important to her.
Paul was in Burlington, and he was just scouting out, perhaps looking for another victim, doing a little peeping Tomery. Leslie came home from a friend's funeral. She came home a little late. She knew her mother was going to be mad at her, so she sort of went into the backyard to get her courage up, I guess, before going in the house. And by complete fluke, there was Bernardo.
How's it going?
You got a cigarette?
I do, but it's in my car.
Well, can we go get it?
Yeah, let's go.
At 2 a.m. on the 15th of June, 1991, 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey vanished. In the summer of 1991, serial rapist Paul Bernardo intensified his campaign of violence when he abducted Leslie Mahaffey from the back garden of her home.
He brought her home and woke up Karla, and she said, "Oh, okay," and went back to bed.
Every sexual sadist that I have dealt with, face-to-face interviews, case consultations, practically every one of them had a fantasy of a long-term captive.
For the next 2 days, Paul and Karla repeatedly raped and tortured Leslie. Two weeks later, the waterline at nearby Lake Gibson receded.
What happened was a fisherman had come out here to go fishing, and he tried to get further out into the water. And while he was doing that, he noticed some cement blocks, and he stepped on one of the blocks trying to get further out. And when he did, the top came off and exposed the body part. When we arrived here, we noticed that there were several similar-looking cement blocks there, and investigation obviously revealed that the rest of the body parts, with the exception of the torso, were in the other cement blocks. What happened next was that we received a call, again, fishermen at a bridge not too far away from this location had discovered a torso floating under the bridge, and that appeared to be the torso belonging to the limbs that were in Lake Gibson.
Somebody went to great lengths for this body not to be recovered, and just, I guess, fortunately, they didn't do a very good job of it.
Niagara Regional Police conducted an intensive search of the crime scene, but uncovered few clues. The remains were taken to the coroner for analysis. That afternoon, Paul and Karla married in a lavish ceremony near Niagara Falls. After the reception, they flew to Hawaii for a 2-week honeymoon. In Niagara, police were trying to identify their victim. They alerted other police teams in the region about the human remains found in Lake Gibson. Halton Regional Police were working on a missing persons case.
Initially, we had what would be considered a standard missing person report for Leslie Mahaffey, who had gone missing from home. We had heard from Niagara Regional Police, who we work with on an ongoing basis, that they had found the body parts in Gibson Lake. That's when we were first sure.
The medical examiner determined that Leslie Mahaffey had been strangled before being dismembered. Police departments across the region collaborated in an effort to find Leslie's killer.
When the investigation changes from a missing person to a homicide, I mean, it kicks up the level of commitment, the resources, the intensity, frankly. It changes it dramatically. It changed it dramatically in Burlington simply because we had so few homicides.
They turned to their only clue, the ready-mix cement used to encase Leslie's remains. After checking numerous stores, investigators failed to find any further leads. A few weeks later, newlyweds Paul and Karla returned from Hawaii.
They're getting a ride back from the airport. Karla's parents told her that they found a body in Lake Gibson. Paul was freaking, of course. but he presented an outward calm demeanor that her body had been found, but he was furious with Karla. And I'm not sure if that's when the beating started or the hitting started with her.
He blamed Karla for not knowing about the receding water tables at Lake Gibson. For the next 9 months, Paul and Karla waited to hear if they were suspects in Leslie's murder.
When he realized that the investigation wasn't going anywhere, he wanted to do it again. This time he wanted to take Karla out with him, and he wanted to, there was a nearby school, there was a lot of students, and he would drive by and he would see the students and a lot of attractive young girls. He needed her to help him lure one of them into his car.
Paul knew that younger women were less likely to approach a male stranger. But they would approach Karla. The couple came upon 15-year-old Kristen French.
They parked in a church parking lot near the school where Kristen walked by every day, even though it was like 4 in the afternoon. And they parked the car in there, and then the plan was that Karla would put a map out and ask for directions and act like the klutzy dumb blonde. And she did that, and Kristen, who was a very cautious young girl, was totally duped by another woman, not believing another woman could be involved in any kind of a murder scheme.
When Kristen didn't return home from school, her parents immediately filed a missing persons report.
Kristen was a very reliable person. She was never known to not come home or be a runoff or a runaway. So as soon as she never came home, and it was late that night, they knew there was something wrong. Our attention was brought to the parking lot of that church very quickly, and there was some evidence left at the parking lot that led us to believe pretty quickly in the investigation that this was more than a missing girl, that she was abducted.
The evidence was sent to the crime lab for analysis. Police canvassed the area, trying to find someone who had seen the abduction.
We started a hotline right away for anybody with any kind of tips.
If anybody's seen my daughter, Kristen French, I'd like to phone the Niagara police as quickly as possible.
We started looking at anybody with previous sexual violence in the background that we knew that were living in our area, investigating them.
Police efforts quickly paid off. They found several people who'd seen the kidnapping.
Witnesses had seen her pulled into a car. The witnesses could only describe them being as 2 people. They weren't able to identify their gender, so we assumed that they were probably 2 men.
And then we had a lead on a possible car seen leaving the church parking lot by some of the witnesses. So now we had a car, and it just escalated from there.
I had her up in a closet at night. So over a day and a half or so. Several times, Paul went out for food, left Karla alone with Kristen. Karla had more than enough opportunity, I believe it was twice, to let her go. She could have just picked up the phone, dialed 911. There would have been a dozen cruisers there within 30 seconds. But Karla did not do it.
On the 30th of April, 10 days after Kristen had disappeared, a man stumbled upon her body in nearby Burlington. An autopsy revealed that, like Leslie Mahaffey, Kristen had been strangled.
Karla still had the chance to exonerate herself almost to a degree by saving the life of this young girl, and she didn't do it.
On the 15th of May, 1992, police departments across southern Ontario formed the Green Ribbon Task Force in an effort to solve the 2 murders.
People of St. Catharines wanted this killer caught. And the police were working on it full time, and they were spending a lot of time working on it. They just weren't coming up with anything. Paul was careful. He was being careful.
The task force received an influx of information concerning the murders. One man suggested his friend, Paul Bernardo, might be involved.
That friend just believed that he was responsible, that he thought that he was a Scarboro rapist, and that he was violent towards women.
Investigators visited Bernardo. He was calm and even admitted to having been questioned in the Scarboro rape case. Investigators confirmed that he was one of hundreds interviewed, and the DNA was still being processed.
And he certainly doesn't fit the stereotype that people believe. A very good-looking young man, sitting there with a nice home here in St. Catharines, with a wife that was at work. There was nothing there to lead us, and certainly nothing in his past, no criminal record or anything that would lead us to look at him any stronger than we looked at any of our other suspects or people of interest at the time.
There was one piece of information in Paul's favor. He didn't drive the type of car witnesses had reported leaving the scene of Kristen's abduction.
Paul was beside himself with amusement. You know, he was making comments about the incompetent cops. They can't even, you know, they don't even have the right car.
Apparently feeling invincible, Paul turned on Karla, completing the 5 steps.
She's doing absolutely everything that he's asked her to do. He says to himself, no decent woman would engage in those type of behaviors, so I was right. All women are bitches, whores, and sluts. And so step number 5 is punishment.
He beat Karla so bad that she had 2 raccoon eyes from battering with a flashlight that she left him, and that was the beginning of the end.
On the 4th of January 1993, Karla's mother convinced her to press charges against Paul for assault. As she packed, Karla searched frantically for the incriminating videotapes of the sexual assaults of Tammy Homolka, Leslie Mahaffey, and Kristen French. But she couldn't find them. 2 days later, while Karla was hiding from Paul at a relative's house, police arrested Paul for assaulting Karla. The following day, they released him without bail. 3 weeks later, there was a breakthrough in the case.
We had spoken to Toronto about Paul Bernardo several times, and there was nothing that connected him to the Scarboro rapes or him to our murders. Then Toronto did a DNA check on Paul, and it did identify Paul as the Scarboro rapist.
The authorities set up surveillance of Paul, while the Scarboro rape investigators obtained search warrants and continued to build their case.
We had no evidence at that time, but the connection was there, it was strong. They were having their rapes in the Toronto area. Then he moved down to our area, and now we have homicides. And it was just a matter of getting the evidence to prove it.
Police interviewed Karla, hoping she would incriminate Paul in the murders.
They came to her, she thought, to talk about the domestic violence charge, but then they began asking questions about the rapes.
She was defensive and uncooperative and requested a lawyer. On the 14th of February, Karla's attorney rang the Toronto prosecutor to discuss a deal.
What appears to have happened is a what-if conversation. What if I was to deliver you a witness to the homicides, and what if that person was involved but not directly involved, and so on and so forth? What could you do for me and my client? In the meantime, he also sent Karla to see a psychologist and a psychiatrist. And they bought into this whole thing about her being a compliant victim. And they produced a report. So armed with the report, they negotiated the deal. And part of the deal was that she would be, as the Americans would call it, a queen for a day. She would have a without prejudice meeting with the police and give her a sample of what she knew.
Karla told police that Paul had murdered Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French after raping them for several days. She said there were videotapes to prove it.
She was laying all the fault on Paul, her husband, as being the one responsible, and that she was just going along doing exactly what he wanted done so that she didn't get beaten or had any more harm coming to her as well.
She was the only other witness to the crimes, to the murders, and so they felt they needed her as a witness. They didn't quite fully understand her role, I guess, and so she signed a deal.
In February 1993, police finally arrested Paul Bernardo for the Scarboro rapes and the 2 killings. But they were still missing the vital physical evidence to prove conclusively that he had committed the murders. After 6 years of investigation, police finally arrested Paul Bernardo. Based on his wife's confession, they believed Bernardo was responsible for a spate of rapes and 2 murders.
But they didn't charge him with the homicides because they didn't have enough. They had nothing to link him to the crime other than Karla's Queen for a Day statement. They brought him into the task force office, and they had a life-size image of Leslie Mahaffey and a life-size image of Kristen French. And they thought they would shock him into confessing. And they sat him down in front of the camera, and he kept saying, I just want to speak to my lawyer. When do I get to speak to my lawyer? I have nothing to say. Thank you very much.
For over 2 months, the police conducted a search of the Bernardo's house. They found several suspicious items, but nothing linking Paul directly to the murders of Leslie and Kristen. On the 17th of May, Karla showed police around the home, pointing out where the girls had been held captive. Police discovered DNA evidence proving Kristen and Leslie had been in the house. The next day, Bernardo was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. In exchange for her testimony against Paul, Karla pleaded guilty to 2 counts of manslaughter in July of 1993. She received a 12-year sentence.
And she remembered that she had not told them about her sister Tammy Homolka. And she tells them the story. And as a result of that, they amend the agreement. So essentially, it's 5 for Leslie, 5 for Kristen, and 2 for Tammy. That's how the deal was made. That's how you get 12 years.
The deal was absolutely stunk. I mean, the deal with the devil, they called it. And she should have got life in jail. And she got 12 years.
"16 months after the deal, John Rosen took over as Paul Bernardo's lawyer and learnt what had happened to the infamous videotapes. Paul had stashed them inside a light fixture in the bathroom.
The tapes depicted Bernardo and Homolka out playing voyeur, taking pictures through windows of people getting undressed and so forth. They depicted the sexual assault and confirmed the unlawful confinement of Leslie Mahaffey. who was blindfolded. They confirmed the unlawful confinement and sexual assault of Kristen French. They portrayed the sexual assault on Tammy Homolka and the participation of both Karla Homolka and Bernardo.
The tapes were used as evidence at Paul's trial. There was a public outcry as they revealed Karla's full involvement in the horrific crimes.
Karla is as much or more a psychopath than is Paul. And I think the videotapes show that she was engaged, happily engaged in sexually assaulting and in fact, in her own way, raping these young girls as much as Paul was. So this is someone that's pretty profoundly pathological.
Her explanation was that she was just play acting for the videotapes, but that off-camera life was hell. But the problem was that off-camera, she still didn't do normal things, like walk out, go to the police, leave.
Paul admitted to the rapes, but denied killing Leslie and Kristen.
He was prepared to let Leslie Mahaffey go because she had been blindfolded and didn't know where she was. And in terms of Kristen French, he left Karla alone with her. He came back and he found her dead.
Finally, on the 1st of September 1995, 8 years after committing his first rape, a jury convicted Paul Bernardo of the murders of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French. He was sentenced to life. On the 23rd of November, Paul pleaded guilty to rape charges as well as Tammy Homolka's manslaughter. He was declared a dangerous offender and will probably never be released from prison. In 2001, after Bernardo had exhausted all his appeals, the videotapes were destroyed. On the 4th of July 2005, Karla Homolka was released from prison after serving her 12-year sentence.
She's living life, she has a baby. Neither Tammy nor Kristen French nor Leslie Mahaffey will ever have that opportunity. And I think it's, in my opinion, a miscarriage of justice.
Karla's true role in the deaths of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French remains a mystery.
People want to blame Karla, and that's fine. But what they forget is that Paul Bernardo was extremely violent. I know there's no question in my mind who was the instigator. Does that minimize what Karla did? Absolutely not.
Neither could have committed the homicides alone, but together they formed an entity that was greater than the sum of the individual parts.
Not much doubt in my mind that he was the killer and she was just the facilitator in this whole sordid, evil, twisted scheme of theirs.
Follow the case of the minivan murderers as Couples Who Kill returns with a brand new episode at 11 tomorrow. But the detective work continues in just a moment on Discovery with Unsolved Murders.